Introduction. Friends, if you are excited to watch the much-awaited movie 28 Years Later, 2025, in English, then make sure to like this video. If you're visiting our channel for the very first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any updates. In today's video, we are going to dive into everything you need to know about 28 Years Later. We'll cover what this movie is about, where you can watch it, and all the interesting behind-the-scenes facts you'll want to hear. I will also tell you which OTT platform or satellite channel will stream this movie, so stay tuned for that important info. We're going to break down details from the technical side, the music, pre-production, filming, post-production, the budget, and of course, the box office collection. I'll also share the storyline of the film, give you a short review, and discuss the key facts that make this movie so exciting. We'll look at the full star cast, the actors' performances, and which actor is playing which role. That's why I'm requesting you, friends, to watch this video till the end. You won't want to miss anything. So let's get started. Alright friends, let's dive straight into the heart of 28 Years Later and unpack this wild, intense, and emotional roller coaster of a story. Right from the opening scene, the movie wastes no time pulling you back into the grim, desolate world we remember. But now, nearly 3 decades after the first outbreak, the world has mutated in ways no one could have predicted. The narrative opens with a sharp, eerie calm, setting up a world where survivors have carved out fragile, uneasy pockets of normalcy. But the fear of infection still lingers like a shadow. You think you know where it's going, survivors fighting to stay alive. But hold on, because the film isn't here to just play by the old rules. The story doesn't unfold in a neat, linear way. It plays with time, jumping between past and present, showing us flashbacks of the outbreak's early days through the memories of characters who survived the original chaos. These flashbacks are not just backstory filler, they reveal painful, emotional scars, shaping how the characters act in the present. We shift perspectives too, jumping between a few key survivors, each with their own motivations, secrets, and struggles. 1 minute, you're following a hardened soldier haunted by guilt. The next, you're inside the mind of a scientist desperate to cure the rage virus before it wipes out the last of humanity. The first major turning point hits when the survivors discover signs that the virus may have mutated, not just infecting people, but possibly evolving in a way no one saw coming. Suddenly, the small, safe zones aren't so safe anymore. The tension builds not just from the external threat of the infected, but from the cracks within the survivor group itself. Old betrayals, hidden agendas, and mounting distrust push the group to the edge. There's a brilliant middle section where the characters are forced to leave their stronghold, and the journey across a ravaged, overgrown city is packed with claustrophobic terror, unexpected alliances, and moral dilemmas that hit hard. One of the most striking emotional beats comes when a character, who has been holding themselves together for the sake of the group, finally breaks down after a devastating loss. And the film doesn't rush past this moment. It lingers, making you feel the weight of the years, the exhaustion, and the crumbling hope. Another brilliant narrative twist comes when they realize that the infected may not be the only danger. A faction of survivors with a twisted philosophy about the future of humanity steps into the picture, and the conflict between human factions becomes just as intense as the fight against the infected. The climax ramps up into a chaotic, edge-of-your-seat finale where all the threads collide. Personal grudges, scientific breakthroughs, survival choices, and it's not always clear who's going to make it out alive. The film doesn't hand you easy answers or tie things up neatly. Instead, it leaves you grappling with questions about survival, sacrifice, and what it really means to rebuild after the end of the world. The emotional punch hits hard, and the thematic weight lingers, making 28 Years Later a story that sticks with you long after the credits roll. So buckle up, because this isn't just another zombie or infection survival movie. It's a layered, unpredictable, and deeply human story that plays with time, perspective, and emotion in a way that keeps you hooked from the first scene to the last desperate breath. Let's jump into the juicy part, friends. The characters of 28 Years Later, because this movie doesn't just throw random survivors at you and hope you care. Oh no, it gives you layered, complex, deeply human characters who pull you right into their messy, broken world. First up, we have the central figure, a grizzled survivor who has been carrying the weight of past mistakes for decades. You can practically feel the guilt dripping off every word they speak. And what's brilliant is how the film slowly unpacks what they've been through, peeling back layers bit by bit. It's not just here's a tough hero, it's here's a human being barely holding it together under the mask of toughness. Watching this character go from rigid control to moments of vulnerability is one of the most compelling arcs in the movie. Then there's the younger scientist character, full of hope, desperation, and maybe just a little arrogance. They're driven by a belief that the virus can be cured, but what starts as pure optimism shifts when they're forced to confront just how high the stakes are. Their arc isn't about heroics. It's about realizing that science alone can't save everyone, and that sometimes survival comes down to hard, gut-wrenching decisions. The tension between this character and the hardened survivor is electric. You can sense the clash between idealism and realism in every scene they share. What's so entertaining here is how the relationships between the characters evolve under pressure. You get these small moments, a shared joke, a silent glance, a burst of anger, that reveal how much they rely on or resent each other. There's a brilliant subplot involving two side characters. One, a survivor who's all charm and talk, hiding deep insecurities, and the other, a stoic protector who reveals layers of warmth you don't expect. Their friendship becomes one of the emotional backbones of the film, adding a sense of heart to the brutal world they're trapped in. We can't forget the antagonistic forces, and I'm not just talking about the infected. A rival group of survivors with their own twisted vision of the future shakes up everything halfway through the movie. What's so fascinating is that the film doesn't just paint them as villains, it gives them motivations that, while dark, make a twisted sort of sense. You find yourself questioning, who's really right here? Who's the real monster? The clash between the two groups isn't just physical, it's philosophical, and it pushes our main characters to reflect on what they're really fighting for. What makes the character development so satisfying is that no one comes out the same on the other side. People break. People rise. People make mistakes that cost lives, and they carry the weight of those choices. Some characters surprise you by stepping up when it matters, while others crack under pressure in ways you didn't see coming. It's a constant dance of shifting loyalties, hard-earned trust, and personal growth. By the end, even the characters you thought you had figured out reveal hidden layers that make you rethink everything. In 28 years later, the characters don't just serve the plot. They are the plot. Their personal journeys, their messy relationships, their motivations and transformations shape every twist and turn. And that, friends, is what keeps you glued to the screen, invested not just in who lives or dies, but in who these people are and who they become when the world falls apart around them. Let's get into the meat of the performances in 28 years later, because wow, the cast absolutely throws themselves into these roles and doesn't hold back for a second. Right from the opening scenes, the lead actor commands attention, not with loud heroics, but with the quiet weight of someone who's been through hell and has the scars to prove it. Every glance, every pause, every small flicker of emotion across their face tells you more than a full page of dialogue ever could. You can practically feel the years of regret and survival etched into their body language, and the way they carry that tension through every interaction pulls you deep into the emotional undercurrent of the story. Then we've got the scientist character, played with this perfect mix of youthful energy and simmering desperation. The actor here knows exactly how to balance hope and panic. One moment they're full of determined fire, convinced they can save the day, and the next you see their hands shaking when no one's looking, the mask slipping just enough for you to glimpse their fear. It's such a layered performance, and it really anchors the push and pull dynamic between science, survival, and morality that runs through the whole film. The supporting cast is where the movie really surprises you. There's a survivor played by someone who's mostly known for comedic roles, but here they dial into something darker. A smooth-talking, charming character whose humor hides deep, aching vulnerability. Watching them shift from lighthearted moments to raw, emotional breakdowns is like watching someone peel off a mask, and it adds so much richness to the group dynamic. And then there's the stoic protector character, played with quiet, almost intimidating restraint. But the actor knows exactly when to let those small, subtle cracks show. revealing the warmth and humanity beneath the hard exterior. The antagonistic group brings their own acting fireworks to the table. The leader of this faction isn't just some cartoon villain. The actor delivers a performance that oozes conviction and menace, making you believe that they truly think they're the hero of their own story. That complexity keeps the tension high and makes every confrontation between the two groups charged with not just physical danger, but emotional stakes. What really stands out is how well the entire cast works together. There's a lived-in chemistry between them, the kind that makes you believe these people have been through unimaginable things together. Small gestures, eye contact, shared silences, all of it adds layers of believability to their relationships. When characters argue or reconcile, when they break down or rise up, you feel it, not because the script demands it, but because the actors make you believe it's real. Even the infected, yes, even the background performers snarling and raging through the chaos, bring an unsettling intensity that keeps the threat alive in every scene. Nothing feels phoned in or half-hearted here. Everyone on screen is fully committed, and that collective effort elevates the emotional depth of the story, making every loss hit harder and every small victory feel earned. This is a cast that knows how to turn a survival thriller into something deeply, painfully human, and watching them bring these characters to life is one of the biggest thrills of the whole movie. Let's talk about the direction of 28 years later, because friends, this movie doesn't just stumble into greatness. It's carefully, masterfully crafted from start to finish. The director knows exactly the kind of world they want to pull you into, and they waste no time plunging you headfirst into it. The tone is set from the very first frame. Bleak, tense, soaked in dread, but not without slivers of fragile beauty. There's this balance between chaos and quiet that runs through the entire film. One moment you're watching a frantic, heart-pounding escape through crumbling streets. The next you're dropped into an eerie, still landscape where the silence screams louder than any infected could. The mood is where the director really flexes their skill. Every shot feels purposeful, designed to pull out an emotional response. The use of light is stunning. Stark contrast between shadow and harsh, washed-out daylight make every scene feel raw and unsettling. You get these long, lingering shots where the camera just holds, daring you to sit in the discomfort, forcing you to notice the smallest flickers of fear or doubt in a character's eyes. But then, when the action kicks in, the director ramps up the energy with tight, claustrophobic framing and jittery camera movements that make you feel like you're right there in the chaos, heart racing, breath short. The pacing is another brilliant touch. This isn't just nonstop action or endless tension. The director knows when to push and when to pull back. There are slow, thoughtful stretches where the characters reflect, plot, or just exist, moments that allow the weight of the world and the emotional stakes to sink in. And just when you're starting to catch your breath, BAM, a sudden burst of violence, an ambush, a terrifying reveal, flipping the energy on its head. It's this rhythm of build-up and release that keeps you glued to the screen, always on edge. Stylistically, there are some bold choices here that make the experience unforgettable. The way flashbacks are woven in, not just as standard memory cuts, but almost like haunting visions creeping into the present, gives the whole film a ghostly, dreamlike quality. The sound design is another standout. The director leans heavily into moments where the soundtrack drops away, leaving you with only the raw, unnerving sounds of breathing, shuffling, or distant shrieks. It creates a kind of immersive tension that music alone could never match. What ties it all together is the director's clear, unwavering narrative vision. They know exactly what story they want to tell, not just about infected monsters and survival, but about people, trauma, resilience, and the thin line between hope and hopelessness. Every creative decision, from the way the camera lingers to the pacing of a conversation to the timing of an emotional reveal, feeds into that vision. You can feel the director's hand guiding you through this world, shaping not just what you see, but how you feel about what you're seeing. It's gripping, it's unnerving, and it leaves you thinking long after the final scene fades. All right, friends, let's get into the gorgeous, gritty, heart-pounding cinematography of 28 years later, because this film doesn't just tell its story with words and performances. It tells it with every single frame. The camera here isn't just a passive observer. It's an active participant, pulling you deep into the world and making sure you feel every ounce of tension, despair, and fleeting beauty the characters experience. Let's start with the camera angles. You get these wide, desolate shots of abandoned cities, overgrown landscapes, and decaying buildings that immediately set the scale. This is a world that's been reclaimed by time, and the camera captures that loneliness and vastness perfectly. But then, when things tighten, when danger closes in, the cinematographer pulls you into suffocating close-ups, shaky handheld movements, and off-center framing that make you feel like you're right there, trapped alongside the characters, scanning every shadow for movement, every corner for a lurking threat. The lighting is a masterpiece on its own. There's this brutal, washed-out daylight that makes the world feel exposed, raw, and unforgiving. No comforting soft glows or golden hours here. But then, in the nighttime scenes, everything shifts. The cinematographer uses deep shadows, flickering firelight, and harsh artificial lights to create pockets of tension where you're constantly questioning what's hiding just out of sight. Some of the most striking moments come when the lighting contrasts sharply within a single scene, like when a survivor stands in a beam of harsh light surrounded by pure blackness, visually isolating them and amplifying the sense of loneliness or vulnerability. Framing is another area where the film really shines. There's a clear, thoughtful intention behind how characters are positioned in the frame, often dwarfed by the ruined world around them or boxed in by crumbling walls and debris, visually reinforcing the theme of human fragility against an overwhelming, decaying backdrop. And let's not forget the moments when the cinematography leans into visual beauty, even in the middle of chaos. There are scenes where sunlight streams through broken windows, dust motes floating in the air like tiny, glowing reminders of the past. There are shots where overgrown vines wrap around rusting vehicles, turning destruction into something hauntingly beautiful. These aren't just pretty pictures for the sake of it. They serve the emotional atmosphere, reminding you that even in this brutal world, there's still a strange, aching sense of beauty. Tension is where the cinematography really earns its gold star. The camera holds just a second too long on an empty hallway, a darkened doorway, a character's trembling hand, and your brain fills in the threat before anything even happens. It's not just about what's shown, it's about what's implied, and the cinematographer knows exactly how to manipulate that. One especially unforgettable moment comes during a chase scene where the camera ducks and weaves through narrow, crumbling corridors, the tight framing making every twist and turn feel like a life or death gamble. You can almost feel the walls closing in, the panic rising, the heartbeat pounding urgency of every movement. So yes, the cinematography here isn't just decoration. It's a driving force, creating atmosphere, ramping up tension, and adding unexpected flashes of beauty that deepen the emotional punch of the story. Every shot, every angle, every flicker of light is doing work, pulling you deeper into a world that's as hauntingly beautiful as it is terrifyingly dangerous. Let's dive into the editing and pacing of 28 years later, because friends, this movie doesn't just move. It pulses, it jerks, it breathes in a way that pulls you right into its rhythm. The editors knew they weren't cutting together just another horror action flick. They were stitching together a living, gasping beast that grabs you by the throat and drags you along for the ride. From the start, you feel the tempo settle into your bones. The film opens with slow, unsettling shots, long takes, measured cuts, letting you soak in the bleakness of the world, giving you time to notice the quiet details, the empty streets, the hollow-eyed survivors. It's like the movie is whispering, wait, just wait, the storm's coming. And oh, when it hits, the editing snaps. The transitions between tension and action are some of the best in recent memory. One moment you're sitting in a hushed scene, characters exchanging careful words, the editing stretching the silence to make you squirm. Then suddenly, something shatters that quiet, a door slams open, a scream cuts through, an infected bursts into frame, and the editing flips gears instantly. Fast, jagged cuts slam you into the chaos, making your pulse race as the camera swings, the sound spikes, the shots come rapid fire. But here's the trick. It never becomes mindless. Even at its fastest, the editing is sharp, controlled, always making sure you know where you are, who you're following, and why this moment matters. You're not lost in shaky confusion. You're right there, locked into the heart of the action. What's really fun to notice is how the pacing plays with your expectations. You might think a movie like this would keep hammering you with nonstop intensity, but no, it breathes. After big, frantic sequences, the film knows to slow down, give you space to process, to mourn, to watch the characters rebuild themselves for the next blow. These slower stretches aren't filler. They're the emotional glue that holds the whole story together. The editors know when to let a scene stretch out, when to cut away, when to jump forward, and when to linger. Sometimes a simple, quiet transition, a cut from a grieving face to an empty landscape, says more than any dialogue could. There's also a rhythm to how the narrative unfolds that keeps you hooked. The pacing doesn't just follow a simple rising action to climax. It ebbs and flows, creating peaks of tension and valleys of reflection. You get bursts of high-stakes action, followed by uneasy lulls, followed by sharp, sudden turns. This unpredictable rhythm keeps you on edge, never quite sure when the next hit is coming. And the editors play into this beautifully, crafting moments where you're left dangling in suspense, only to be jolted out of your seat a beat later. One of the standout editing choices comes during moments of chaos when time seems to bend. There are sequences where the action slows just enough for you to catch the horror in a character's eyes, or the moment when they make a split-second, life or death choice. And then, bam, the cuts speed up again, slamming you back into the rush. It's this elastic sense of time, controlled through precise editing, that gives the film such a unique emotional punch. You don't just watch the action unfold. You feel its rhythm deep in your gut. The editors aren't just cutting a story together. They're shaping an experience that lives and breathes, stumbles and sprints, whispering in one moment and screaming in the next, pulling you helplessly along every step of the way. Let's talk about the soundtrack and score of 28 years later, because wow, this is not just background noise. This is the lifeblood of the film. From the first haunting notes, you can feel the music wrapping itself around the story, seeping into the cracks of every moment, amplifying the dread, the sorrow, the tension, and sometimes even the fleeting hope. The composer doesn't just drop in loud bangs or dramatic swells for the big action scenes. No, they craft an entire sonic landscape that pulls you deep into the world, sometimes whispering, sometimes roaring, but always working its way under your skin. One of the most powerful elements is the use of recurring motifs. There are musical phrases that show up at key points, like emotional signposts, tying different parts of the story together. You hear a certain melody early on when the characters are at their most vulnerable, and later, when they're facing their darkest moments, that same melody returns, but twisted, slowed, darkened, and it hits you hard. It's like the score itself is reminding you how far the characters have come, and how much they've lost or gained. It creates a sense of continuity that gives the film emotional weight far beyond the visuals alone. And let's talk about the silence, because the soundtrack knows exactly when to disappear. There are moments when the music pulls back entirely, leaving you with nothing but the sound of ragged breathing, distant footsteps, or the eerie rustle of the ruined world. That absence of score is just as powerful as the music itself, making your ears strain, your nerves tighten, your anticipation skyrocket. Then just when you think you can't take it anymore, the music floods back in, sometimes with a slow, creeping build, sometimes with a sudden, jarring punch, and the emotional release is massive. The standout compositions in this film are not just about big, epic themes. Sure, there are tracks that make your heart pound during the chase scenes, with pounding percussion and driving rhythms, but there are also these delicate, almost fragile pieces, soft piano notes, distant echoes, mournful strings that play over the quiet, reflective moments. It's this balance between the intimate and the explosive that gives the score its real power. You're not just hearing music, you're feeling the characters' fear, their grief, their determination, all woven into the fabric of the sound. What's especially impressive is how seamlessly the score blends with the story. It never feels like it's screaming for your attention or overshadowing the performances. Instead, it slips perfectly into place, elevating the emotion and tension without ever becoming overbearing. In some scenes, you might not even consciously notice the music, but you feel it, shaping your reactions, guiding your emotions, pulling you deeper into the atmosphere. It's like the soundtrack is a silent character of its own, whispering in your ear, pushing you to the edge, and holding you there. So yes, the music in 28 Years Later isn't just an accessory. It's a vital force, a heartbeat under every scene, a carefully crafted blend of melody, rhythm, and silence that amplifies every emotional beat of the story. It's the kind of score that lingers in your head long after the credits roll, reminding you of the journey you just went on and making you want to dive right back in for another listen. Now let's dive into the themes and messages that 28 Years Later explores, because this movie is more than just an adrenaline-fueled ride through a post-apocalyptic world. The story digs deep into human survival, moral choices, and the emotional toll of living in the aftermath of a global disaster. It's one of those films that keeps throwing big questions at you, making you rethink what you thought you knew about human nature, about fear, and about hope. First up, there's a heavy exploration of survival versus humanity. In a world where every day is a struggle just to stay alive, the film constantly asks, how much of your soul are you willing to sacrifice to survive? What happens when survival itself becomes more important than the values and connections that make us human? The characters are put through agonizing decisions that make them question who they are and who they've become in the wake of the apocalypse. Are they the same people who used to dream, laugh, and love? Or have they become something else, something harder, colder, and willing to compromise on anything if it means staying alive for one more day? This theme isn't just an afterthought. It's woven into the very fabric of the story, and it lingers with you long after the movie ends. The film also doesn't shy away from the idea of the cost of progress and the moral ambiguity of actions taken for the greater good. The characters face choices that don't have clear answers. The struggle between doing what's right and doing what's necessary bleeds into almost every moment of the film. You'll be left questioning, can you really blame someone for making horrible decisions when the stakes are life and death? Or is there always a line you should never cross, no matter how dire the situation gets? The film doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it lets you stew in the uncertainty, and that's what makes these themes so powerful. They don't feel like a lecture. They feel like real dilemmas that you, as the viewer, are wrestling with alongside the characters. And then there's the theme of hope in the face of despair, which is explored in such a nuanced way. This isn't the kind of movie where the heroes find an easy, shiny path out of the darkness. Hope doesn't come on a silver platter. It's messy, fragile, and often feels like a fleeting illusion. But it's there even in the smallest of gestures, a shared look between two survivors, a quiet moment of solace amidst the chaos. What's interesting is that this hope doesn't come from grand, sweeping gestures or epic triumphs. It comes from the raw, sometimes painful connections between people, the will to push forward despite the odds, and the small acts of kindness that still persist in the most broken of worlds. It's a theme that feels earned, not forced, and it leaves you with a lingering sense of possibility amidst all the darkness. Then, there's the exploration of the consequences of human actions. The world these characters are navigating is one of their own making, a result of unchecked ambition, greed, and the inevitable fallout of pushing boundaries too far. The movie takes a hard look at how humanity's need to control, exploit, and dominate nature has led to disaster, and how we're often left to deal with the consequences long after the fact. It's not just a cautionary tale about climate change or scientific overreach. It's about the price we pay for the decisions we make today. And let's be real, there's no sugarcoating here. The film doesn't act like there's some grand redemption awaiting us in the end. Instead, it forces us to reckon with the long-term effects of our actions, something that hits a little too close to home for comfort. What makes these themes so compelling is that they don't just sit there waiting for you to notice them. They're embedded in the fabric of the narrative and the characters' journeys. You don't have characters standing around giving speeches about morality. You see them grappling with their choices, sometimes failing, sometimes rising to the occasion. And in doing so, the film communicates these deeper ideas through the raw, unfiltered actions of the people you're watching. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it's brutally honest. And that's what makes the themes land with such force. By the end, you're left not just with the usual questions about survival, but with a whole list of bigger questions about the human condition that will make you look at the world a little differently. Let's get into the visual effects and CGI of 28 years later, because this movie has some serious chops when it comes to blending the digital and the practical to create a world that feels real, gritty, and utterly immersive. From the moment the film kicks off, you can tell that the visual effects aren't just there for show. They're working hand in hand with the story to build tension, establish atmosphere, and make you feel like you're truly stepping into this post-apocalyptic nightmare. What's impressive here is how seamlessly the CGI and practical effects blend together. The digital effects are never in your face, and that's exactly what makes them so effective. Instead of flashy, attention-grabbing explosions or over-the-top creatures, the CGI is used in a way that feels organic to the world. You get these haunting, computer-generated vistas of desolate cities overtaken by nature, tall skyscrapers crumbling, wild vines creeping up broken buildings, and you don't question it for a second. It's as though the world was always meant to look this way, and the effects only enhance what's already there, adding layers of decay and ruin that make the apocalypse feel like it's been slowly unfolding for decades. The practical effects, however, are where things really shine. The filmmakers didn't rely too heavily on CGI for the day-to-day survival scenes or the more intimate moments. Instead, you've got real, tangible things like the props, the costumes, the makeup that anchor you to the reality of the characters' struggles. When people get hurt, it feels real. The blood is thick, the wounds are gory, and there's no escaping the grim physicality of their situation. When the survivors interact with their environment, you can tell it's not all green screen. They're really in a destroyed building, climbing over rubble, pushing through debris, and you feel it. It makes everything more grounded, more immediate. But it's not just about the big effects either. The small, subtle details, like the flickering of lights in a dilapidated building or the eerie glow of a dying fire, are enhanced through a mixture of digital and practical work. And it's all so well integrated that you never think twice about what's real and what's digital. The CGI never steals the spotlight. It just fills in the gaps, creating an atmosphere of slow, creeping decay without overshadowing the human elements at the core of the story. Now, don't get me wrong. The movie does have its share of jaw-dropping visual moments. Some of the creature designs, for instance, are downright terrifying. When you see the infected up close, the CGI is used to make their movements unnervingly unnatural, adding this sense of wrongness to everything they do. The way they move, the way they react, is both disturbing and visually striking. But even these moments are framed within the film's broader, more grounded world, never feeling out of place or too digital. And let's not forget the way digital effects are used to enhance the emotional beats of the film. There are these incredible sequences where the use of CGI adds a layer of tension or dread, like when the camera zooms in on a character and the world around them starts to crumble. Not in a flashy, look at this cool effect way, but in a way that underscores the feeling of everything falling apart. It's all about using the effects to support the emotional and thematic core of the film, not distract from it. The balance between practical and digital is what makes 28 years later stand out in terms of visual effects. The digital enhancements aren't trying to steal the show or wow you with out-of-this-world imagery. They're there to add to the world, to help tell the story, to create a setting that feels just as decayed and falling apart as the people in it. And it works perfectly. When you combine that with the real-world, tactile feeling of the practical effects, the crumbling walls, the real dirt and blood, you've got a visually immersive experience that draws you deeper into the story without ever pulling you out. It's a subtle but powerful reminder that the most effective visual storytelling is the kind that doesn't call attention to itself. It just makes you believe in the world. Let's talk about the set design and locations in 28 years later, because the world building here is a masterpiece in itself. The settings, props, and overall production design do more than just create a backdrop for the action. They become a part of the story, reflecting the emotional landscape of the characters and the fractured state of the world they inhabit. Every building, every street, every crumbling corner feels like it's telling its own tragic tale, and it's all impeccably crafted to make you feel like you're not just watching a movie. You're walking through this destroyed world with the characters. The locations are absolutely key to the film's success. From the decimated cities to the overgrown forests, every environment feels fully realized. The filmmakers didn't just throw a bunch of ruined sets together and call it a day. No, these locations breathe with history. You see the remnants of human life, abandoned shopping malls with rusted signs, empty apartments filled with decaying furniture, cracked roads overtaken by nature's creeping hands, and they tell you everything you need to know about the world. The past is still there, lingering in the forgotten details. There's a tangible sense of loss, like you can almost hear the echoes of a civilization that once was. It's haunting, and it makes you feel the weight of the world on the characters' shoulders as they move through these landscapes that once held so much life. And then the props. Oh, the props. These aren't just random objects thrown around to fill the space. Each one feels like it's been carefully chosen, placed with intention. You've got weapons that look worn and used, like they've seen years of desperate battles. The characters' clothing is weathered, ragged, but practical, nothing flashy, nothing out of place. Even the smallest details, the cracked, dusty picture frames on a wall, the faded family photos in a drawer, the remnants of meals long abandoned, all add a layer of authenticity to the environment. You're not just looking at things, you're experiencing them. They make the world feel lived in, real, and painfully close to what could be our own future. The way the locations add depth to the story is another thing entirely. Each new place the characters visit feels like a chapter in a larger, heartbreaking narrative. For instance, when the survivors move through a desolate town overtaken by nature, it's not just a cool location for an action scene. The overgrowth, the crumbling walls, the shattered windows, they reflect the theme of decay, of life being consumed by time. The environments aren't just there to look cool. They're there to help tell the emotional arc of the characters. Every place they walk through feels like it's bearing witness to their struggle, reminding them, and us, of what's been lost. There's also a contrast in the settings that plays into the mood shifts. The film gives you moments of quiet, introspective beauty with wide shots of desolate landscapes, the horizon stretching out forever, the sky heavy with clouds, nature reclaiming what's been abandoned. These moments offer you a glimpse of peace, a visual breath before the storm of chaos and action hits. But then, when the action picks up, the locations get darker, more claustrophobic, like the walls themselves are closing in on you. The narrow, shadowy alleyways, the darkened interiors, the flickering lights, these spaces are suffocating, amplifying the tension and pushing the characters and you into a corner where survival is the only thing that matters. What's also impressive is how the set design plays with the passage of time. You can see the wear and tear on everything. Buildings aren't just old, they're decaying, as if time itself has turned against them. There's a sense that everything is slipping away, and that feeling is reflected in the character's journey. The environments are alive with the story, constantly reminding you that time is not on their side, that the world they once knew is gone, and that they are living in a fragile, shifting reality. The locations in 28 years later are more than just pretty backdrops or functional spaces. They are essential to the narrative. They shape the tone, amplify the stakes, and add a layer of emotional depth that you can't get from just dialogue or action alone. Whether it's a crumbling urban wasteland or a quiet forest hiding deadly secrets, every setting is another piece of the puzzle, another part of the world that reflects the heart of the story. Let's dive into the dialogue and script of 28 years later, because the writing here is as much a part of the film's power as the visuals and performances. This isn't a movie where the dialogue is just there to move the plot along. It's alive, layered, and deeply tied to the themes of survival, morality, and the human experience in a broken world. The characters speak to each other like they've lived through hell, and that means every word carries weight. Every line feels earned, and there's a rawness to the way they communicate. First off, the dialogue feels real. It's not some slick, polished script where every line is perfectly crafted to sound like a famous quote. No, This feels like the kind of conversation you'd expect from people who have lived through a world-shattering event. There's a grit to it, a kind of rough-edged authenticity. The survivors don't talk in flowery, poetic language, but in quick, sharp exchanges that tell you more about their personalities, their fears, and their coping mechanisms than any exposition ever could. Whether it's a sarcastic quip to lighten the mood or a quiet, meaningful confession about loss, the dialogue rings true to the situation they're in. And then there are those moments of sharp wit that pop up when you least expect them. In a world that's falling apart, there's a certain dark humor that emerges, and the script knows how to play with that. The characters crack jokes, sometimes awkward, sometimes genuinely funny. But it's clear that this humor is more than just comic relief. It's a survival mechanism. When everything is falling to pieces around them, the humor is a way to hold on to something human, something normal. These moments of levity, though rare, offer a bit of a breather before the next emotional gut punch, and they add a layer of depth to the characters, making them feel more complex and real. But the real emotional weight of the script shines through in the quieter moments. When the characters talk about their pasts, their regrets, their hopes, or lack thereof, it hits hard. There's nothing forced or melodramatic about these scenes. The script doesn't linger on sentimentality. Instead, it cuts straight to the raw truth. You hear a character talk about the family they've lost, and it's not a big speech, but a quiet, resigned admission that tears at you. The way they speak about the world they once knew, the one that's now gone forever, feels like a punch to the gut. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how real it feels. These aren't speeches. These are people living with the weight of their trauma, and it feels like the script is asking you to live it with them. The script is also effective at building tension and emotional stakes through its dialogue. The characters don't just talk for the sake of talking. Every conversation has a purpose, whether it's to reveal a hidden fear, to challenge a belief, or to create an impossible choice. The dialogue doesn't always tell you exactly what's going on. Sometimes it's cryptic, sometimes it's broken up by pauses and silences, but it always adds to the atmosphere. A simple line like, "We're not who we used to be," becomes a devastating reflection of how much the world has changed and how much the characters have changed with it. Those small, seemingly insignificant lines often land with the most emotional impact because they reflect the bigger themes without hitting you over the head with them. And then there are those standout lines that define the film. You know the ones I'm talking about, the lines that stick with you long after the credits roll. They're not always the most dramatic, but they're the ones that speak to the heart of the movie's message. A throwaway line might capture the futility of the character's struggle, or a rare moment of clarity might express the deep human desire for connection, even in a world that seems to have lost all hope. These lines don't feel like they were written to be iconic. They just are, because they come from the characters' lived experiences. It's the kind of writing that stays with you, not because it's showy, but because it's so grounded in the story. What's remarkable about the script of 28 Years Later is how it effortlessly weaves these emotional, philosophical, and dramatic threads into the dialogue. You never feel like you're being hit over the head with a message. Instead, the writing allows you to experience the world through the characters, making you think and feel without forcing you to do so. Every line, whether it's spoken in anger, sorrow, or just sheer exhaustion, feels like it has a reason to be there. And when a line lands, it doesn't just stay in the moment. It lingers, quietly shaping your thoughts long after the conversation is over. When it comes to 28 Years Later, the film does something pretty clever in terms of genre execution. At its core, it's an apocalypse thriller, but it doesn't just tick all the boxes and lean into the usual tropes we've come to expect. It plays with those conventions, twists them just enough, and throws in some fresh ideas that elevate the whole genre, making it feel like more than just a retread of familiar ground. First off, let's talk about the usual apocalyptic thriller blueprint. You've got the survivors, the desolate world, the constant threat of danger. You know, the usual. But 28 Years Later doesn't just stay in that safe zone. It takes these expectations and subverts them in some pretty cool ways. For example, the usual cast of characters might include a grizzled hero, a reluctant leader, and maybe a group of ragtag survivors with varying skill sets. But here, You don't always get the characters you think you're going to get. The film doesn't rely on a one-size-fits-all approach to its cast. Instead of the hero always charging in with a plan, the characters feel more human. They're imperfect, making tough decisions on the fly, and their personal growth is just as important as their survival. It's a nice little twist on the usual formula where the character arc doesn't always follow the typical hero's journey trajectory. Then there's the way the film plays with tension and suspense. You know the drill. A few action-packed set pieces, lots of running, maybe a monster or two lurking in the shadows. But 28 years later doesn't go full throttle into nonstop action. Instead, it builds suspense in a way that feels much more organic. It's not about throwing in jump scares every 5 minutes, or having explosions for the sake of explosions. It's about creating an atmosphere of impending doom, where the characters are constantly on edge and the tension rises slowly. The quiet moments between the chaos are just as important as the action scenes. Those moments of silence when the characters are trying to regroup or find shelter are where the suspense really grows. It's more about the what-ifs than the whats. You're left wondering what might happen next, what's lurking in the shadows, what the consequences will be if they fail. It's a subtle, almost understated way of building tension, but it works perfectly within the genre. Now about humor. A lot of post-apocalyptic movies like to pile on the grimness, but 28 years later knows when to throw in a bit of dark humor to break the tension. The humor isn't over the top or out of place. It's not there to undercut the stakes, but rather to show that the characters are still human underneath all the hardship. You get those moments of levity where a character cracks a dry joke or sarcastic remark, and it's not just for comic relief. It's a way for them to cope with the madness around them. These small, character-driven moments of humor help to balance out the intensity of the situation and provide a little emotional release. It's the kind of humor that feels earned, not forced, and it adds a layer of complexity to the characters. But here's where the film really stands out. The drama and emotional beats are expertly woven into the narrative without ever feeling melodramatic. In most post-apocalyptic thrillers, there's usually a sense of hopelessness that can weigh the film down. Not here. The emotional arcs of the characters, their struggles with grief, their desire for redemption, the bonds they form despite the chaos, are what drive the story forward. It's not just about survival, it's about what's worth surviving for. The film doesn't shy away from the emotional cost of living in such a broken world, but it also offers a kind of hope, albeit a fragile one. These moments don't feel out of place, or like they're trying to manipulate your emotions. Instead, they feel like real, human responses to a world that's lost its way. And then there's the action. There's no shortage of thrilling moments here, but they don't overshadow everything else. The film knows how to balance action with narrative depth. There's a constant sense of danger, but the action doesn't always play out in the expected way. It's not just about fighting off the infected or escaping some disaster. Sometimes it's about the internal struggle of the characters, their personal demons, their fears about their futures, and that's where the tension really comes from. The external threats are just the surface. The real battle is happening inside the characters. This approach gives the action sequences a bit more emotional weight. They're not just plot points. They're moments where everything, the stakes, the relationships, the survival, come crashing together. Overall, 28 years later doesn't just follow the apocalyptic genre's rules. It plays with them, bends them, and then throws in some unexpected twists that make the film feel fresh and exciting. It balances action, suspense, humor, and drama in a way that keeps you on the edge of your seat, without ever feeling like it's falling back on cliches. Whether it's the way it redefines its characters, builds tension, or finds moments of humanity in a fractured world, the film offers a genre experience that feels both familiar and completely new. It's a thrilling ride that knows exactly when to push the pedal to the metal and when to pull back, letting the characters' emotional journeys carry just as much weight as the plot itself. 28 Years Later isn't just a post-apocalyptic action flick. It's also a sharp commentary on contemporary issues, politics, and the state of the world we live in. But here's the thing. The film doesn't shove these themes in your face. Instead, It weaves them in so naturally that you almost don't realize the deeper message until it hits you like a ton of bricks. And that's part of the brilliance. This isn't a film that's trying to lecture you about the state of the world. It's using the story to reflect it, showing you what might happen if we continue down certain paths. One of the most powerful elements of the film is its exploration of the human cost of survival, not just the physical toll, but the emotional and psychological one. The film takes place in a world that's been ravaged not just by a viral outbreak or war, but by human negligence, greed, and indifference. In the aftermath, the survivors are left to pick up the pieces of a shattered society, and they're forced to reckon with what's been lost, what's been destroyed, and whether anything is worth rebuilding. This is a direct reflection of real-world issues we're facing today, from environmental collapse to political corruption and the ever-growing divide between the rich and the poor. The world in 28 years later is a cautionary tale, but it's not some far-fetched dystopia. It feels plausible, like it could happen tomorrow if we don't make some serious changes in how we treat each other and the planet. The film doesn't shy away from dealing with social inequality either. The survivors, as diverse as they are, all come from different walks of life, and their varying privileges, or lack thereof, play a huge role in how they navigate the post-apocalyptic world. Some characters have access to resources, while others are left to fend for themselves with nothing. And this disparity isn't just a plot device. It's a commentary on how, in times of crisis, those who are already vulnerable are hit hardest. It's a reflection of how power structures exist even in the most chaotic of worlds, how some people will always find ways to exploit others, even when society is on the brink of collapse. The film doesn't make this overt, but it's there in the background, and it adds a layer of realism that's often missing from films of this genre. What's also interesting is how the film handles the idea of community. In many post-apocalyptic films, it's every man for himself, and trust is a luxury that no one can afford. But in 28 years later, the characters are constantly struggling with the idea of working together or not. They know they need each other to survive, but their personal agendas, fears, and trauma often make cooperation feel impossible. It's a sharp commentary on how, in times of crisis, we are all forced to confront the best and worst of ourselves. Can we come together to build something new? Or are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past? The film doesn't give you a clear answer. It's messy, it's complicated, and that's what makes it so effective. It forces the audience to think about what's important in the face of disaster. Is it survival at any cost? Or is there a deeper meaning to our existence, even in a broken world? The film also touches on identity in a post-apocalyptic context. With society crumbling, the characters are left to redefine who they are. They are no longer the people they once were. The world has stripped away everything familiar. They are forced to ask themselves, what does it mean to be human in this new world? That question is at the heart of many of the film's emotional beats. The characters struggle with what they've lost and what they've become, and the film doesn't shy away from exploring these internal battles. This introspective angle is a sharp commentary on how, in times of crisis, our sense of self can either fracture or grow stronger, depending on how we face the challenges ahead. And then there's the environmental commentary. The film doesn't hit you over the head with it, but it's woven into the fabric of the narrative. The planet has been ravaged, resources have been drained, and nature is both a threat and a survivor. It's a reminder of the delicate balance we've been taking for granted. How our actions today are setting the stage for the world that future generations will inherit. The overgrown cities, the flooded streets, the decimated landscapes, they're all visual metaphors for the consequences of human disregard for the environment. But the film doesn't use this as a finger-wagging lesson. Instead, it's an integral part of the world itself, a backdrop that's as much a character as any of the survivors. One of the most subtle but striking aspects of the film's cultural commentary is the idea of memory and history. In a world that's been torn apart, the characters are forced to confront the fact that the past might not be worth remembering, or worse, that they've forgotten what made them human in the first place. The film questions what happens when the past is erased, when everything you've ever known is lost. How do you rebuild something when you've lost the very knowledge of what that something was? It's a direct commentary on the dangers of forgetting history and the consequences of repeating the mistakes of the past. In terms of sensitive topics, the film handles them with care and nuance. It doesn't shy away from showing the raw, uncomfortable truths of living in a decimated world. The violence isn't glorified, the deaths aren't sensationalized. The emotional trauma that the characters experience feels earned. It's a reflection of the realities of living in a broken world, not some cheap way to tug at your heartstrings. The film doesn't exploit these moments for shock value. Instead, it uses them to show the depth of the characters' experiences and how their struggles are not just external, but deeply internal as well. Ultimately, 28 years later is more than just a thrilling ride through a post-apocalyptic world. It's a reflection of the social and cultural issues we face today. From inequality to environmental destruction, the film challenges the audience to think about how we live, how we treat each other, and what the future might hold if we don't change our ways. It doesn't preach or judge, it simply asks questions, making you reflect on your own place in the world and what kind of future we're creating for ourselves. "28 Years Later" isn't just a film you watch. It's one that grabs you by the heart and doesn't let go. From the very first moments, it starts to build an emotional connection, not just with its characters, but with the audience itself. It pulls you into a world that's both heartbreaking and thrilling, where every moment feels like it's teetering on the edge of something huge, something game-changing. And this emotional investment is what makes the film so effective. You're not just here for the action or the suspense, although those elements are top-notch. You're also here for the humanity of it all. The film crafts characters who feel real, people with flaws, fears, and desires that resonate deeply with anyone who's ever wondered how they'd survive in a world turned upside down. These aren't just survivors trying to make it through. They're people dealing with grief, loss, and the uncertainty of the future. As you watch their journeys unfold, you can't help but feel connected to them, rooting for them, hoping they make it. And when the inevitable tragedies strike, and trust me, they do, it hits you in a way that's almost personal. There's a rawness to these moments, a brutal honesty, that makes the audience feel the weight of each loss. There are moments in this film that are downright gut-wrenching. You'll find yourself holding your breath as the characters make tough decisions, some of which will break your heart. It's not just about surviving, it's about what you lose along the way. And when those emotional payoffs come, when a character finally lets their guard down, or when someone makes a sacrifice for the greater good, it's a powerful punch to the gut. The kind of punch that makes you want to pause the movie, sit back, and reflect for a moment on what just happened. It's the kind of film that lingers long after the credits roll. But it's not all heavy. The film also knows how to lighten the mood without losing its emotional depth. There are these little moments of humor and warmth that shine through, like brief bursts of light in a dark world. It's the kind of humor that feels earned and natural, not some cheap gag or forced one-liner. It's these small, humanizing moments that make the stakes feel even higher when things inevitably take a turn for the worse. You get invested in these characters, in their bonds, and when those bonds are tested, the emotional impact is massive. As for excitement and shock, oh, it's there. The action sequences are well-timed, and they hit with a level of intensity that makes you feel like you're right there in the thick of it. The pacing of these moments is just right, and the shock moments are spread out in a way that keeps you constantly on edge. It's not just about explosions or close calls, it's about what happens when the unexpected occurs. These moments leave you with your heart pounding in your chest, wondering what's coming next. They invite you to watch again, to pick up on the subtle hints or clues you might have missed the first time. And when the film gets to the big, emotional moments, they hit hard. You're not just shocked by what happens, you're affected by it deeply. The beauty of 28 Years Later is that it demands discussion. You'll find yourself talking about it afterward, debating the characters' choices, the moral dilemmas, the ending. It's one of those films that doesn't give you all the answers, but instead lets you draw your own conclusions, which sparks conversation long after you've left the theater or finished the stream. Did that character do the right thing? Was that sacrifice worth it? Could they have done more? These are questions that hang in the air, ready to be explored, discussed, and dissected. And the film doesn't make it easy. It doesn't give you simple answers. It forces you to think, and that's what makes it so engaging. You're not just watching a story unfold. You're actively engaging with it, processing it, and carrying it with you. In fact, the film invites repeat viewings because of how much there is to unpack. On the surface, it's a gripping survival story, but the layers beneath it, the themes, the character arcs, the deeper emotional moments, mean that you can go back and find new insights each time. You'll notice small details in the background, hear the subtext in the dialogue, and pick up on character nuances that you missed before. The more you watch, the more you realize how intricate and well-crafted the story is, and that just adds to its lasting appeal. At the end of the day, this film isn't just about action or shock value. It's about connection. It connects with you emotionally, pulling you into the lives of its characters, making you feel their highs, lows, victories, and losses. And because of that, it leaves a lasting impression. It invites you to reflect on your own life, your own choices, and what it means to survive in a world that's constantly changing. Whether it makes you laugh, cry, or sit on the edge of your seat, 28 years later knows exactly how to get you to feel something. And that emotional resonance, the way it stays with you, is what truly makes it unforgettable. If you've seen post-apocalyptic films before, 28 years later will both feel familiar and refreshingly new at the same time. In terms of genre, it certainly shares DNA with other post-apocalyptic classics. Think of the bleak, decimated world of The Road, or the sheer intensity of Children of Men. Like those films, 28 years later explores the emotional weight of survival in a shattered world. But it also takes risks, offering a unique take that doesn't just stick to the well-worn tropes we've seen 100 times before. What's immediately striking is how it balances human drama with the action. It's a film that leans heavily on the emotional stakes, the desperation of the characters, their inner turmoil, the deep personal sacrifices they make for one another. The emotional resonance of the film feels more nuanced than some of its counterparts, where character development sometimes takes a backseat to explosions and chases. In 28 years later, you're just as invested in what happens to the characters emotionally as you are in their physical survival. It makes the stakes feel higher, the risks more personal. Then there's the director's touch. If you're familiar with their previous works, you'll notice a certain consistency in tone and atmosphere. But 28 years later has something extra. There's a confidence in the direction that pushes the boundaries of the genre. The pacing is deliberately slow in moments, letting the emotional weight build, creating space for reflection, which is not something you always see in post-apocalyptic films. While other films might rush to show the devastation and the big action set pieces, this one takes its time. It builds the tension gradually, letting you feel the characters' fears and uncertainty. There's something thrilling about how it lets you breathe, almost daring you to get too comfortable before it hits you with the next gut punch of a scene. In terms of visuals, the film also feels distinct within the genre. The world building is a breath of fresh air, moving beyond the typical ruined cityscapes and showing a more nuanced approach to how nature and humanity collide. The environments in 28 years later don't just serve as a backdrop to the action. They play a critical role in telling the story. The overgrown forests, the abandoned villages, they're not just settings, they're characters in their own right. This is something we've seen before, of course, but 28 years later brings it to a whole new level by using the settings to reflect the internal emotional states of the characters, adding layers of meaning to the visual storytelling. When comparing it to others in the franchise, or even films in this broader genre, it feels less like a formulaic continuation and more like an evolution. It takes the familiar post-apocalyptic setup and breathes new life into it. The film doesn't rely on shock value or gore to carry the story. Instead, it uses those moments sparingly, allowing the horror to come from the characters' emotional journeys rather than just the physical dangers surrounding them. It's a subtle shift, but a powerful one that sets 28 years later apart from many other films in its category. The film also does something that's hard to pull off. It adds a layer of philosophy and reflection on humanity's place in the world. Where other post-apocalyptic films might focus on the brutality of survival, this one asks, what happens when everything is stripped away? When survival is no longer enough, what is the point of living? It elevates the genre, moving beyond just being a survival story and turning into something that grapples with identity, purpose, and meaning. This introspective angle makes it stand out from the sea of post-apocalyptic films that mostly focus on action and spectacle. If you look at other films in the director's filmography, you can see how they've honed their craft, but 28 years later represents a maturity in their approach to storytelling. It feels more patient and deliberate, focusing on atmosphere and character development rather than just the thrills. If you're a fan of their earlier works, you'll likely appreciate how they've evolved. And for those new to the director, this film serves as a great introduction to their distinctive style, one that doesn't just entertain, but makes you think. When stacked against other films in the genre, 28 years later doesn't just do what's expected. It asks questions, challenges conventions, and offers a deeper look at the psychological impact of living in a broken world. The emotional journey, the world building, the subtle philosophical undercurrents, all of it sets it apart from the typical survival flick. It's a film that makes you feel, and then makes you think long after you've watched it. That's the kind of film that leaves a mark. When you start peeling back the layers of 28 years later, you realize it's not just a survival tale in a post-apocalyptic world. Oh no, it's a visual feast packed with symbolism and metaphors that elevate the story from mere entertainment to something with a deeper resonance. The film has this remarkable ability to use its imagery, setting, and character arcs as a canvas to paint bigger ideas about humanity, survival, and the cyclical nature of destruction. One of the recurring motifs in the film is the decay of the environment, a stark visual metaphor for the crumbling state of human civilization. The forests that have overrun abandoned cities, the dilapidated buildings overtaken by vines, they're not just the backdrop. They reflect the internal decay of the characters, too. The world is literally falling apart around them, but it's more than just the world that's decaying. The characters are also grappling with their own brokenness, trying to hold on to something human in a world that's lost its humanity. The juxtaposition of nature reclaiming these spaces serves as a powerful metaphor for both rebirth and destruction. It's like nature is saying, I'll start over, with or without you. And speaking of that decay, you can't ignore the dichotomy of survival versus morality that runs throughout the film. There's a constant visual tension between the characters doing what's necessary to survive and what they're willing to lose in the process. The film plays with this idea of survival as both a physical and psychological battle. The characters, in their attempts to stay alive, often sacrifice their morals, or at least their previous ideals. And yet, there's always this glimmer of hope that something pure can survive in the midst of this decay. It's subtle, but the film keeps giving us visual hints that humanity hasn't entirely lost its way. The simplest gestures, a helping hand, a shared meal, are shown as symbols of defiance against the chaos surrounding them. Even in the worst moments, there's the potential for human connection, and that becomes a form of resistance to the breakdown of society. The light versus dark imagery is another clever symbolic tool the film uses. In certain scenes, you'll notice how the light often pours in from narrow spaces, breaking through shadows and darkness. This doesn't just highlight the beauty of the cinematography, it's a metaphor for hope. It's a visual cue that, even in the bleakest of situations, there's always the possibility of light. But the film doesn't let you forget that light is fleeting. Just as easily as it appears, it can disappear, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. And so you have this constant interplay, a delicate balance between hope and despair, life and death. The light represents those fleeting moments of human connection, the bursts of warmth that occasionally flicker in the lives of the characters. The darkness, meanwhile, represents the overwhelming weight of the world they're surviving in. And then there's the cyclical imagery. Throughout the film, you'll see recurring visual themes that hint at the repetition of history. The crumbling cities, the overgrown ruins, the struggles of the characters. It all suggests that history might be repeating itself. Perhaps humanity is doomed to keep making the same mistakes, continually rebuilding and destroying, never truly breaking free from the cycle of self-destruction. The idea of time itself being cyclical is reinforced through certain flashbacks and moments where the characters find themselves in places that echo the past. These moments aren't just about nostalgia for a world that's gone. They're about learning from the past, or perhaps failing to learn from it. The film seems to ask, what do we truly take with us from history? Can we break the cycle, or are we forever trapped in it? Now, look at the characters themselves. Some of them are struggling to hold onto their own identity in this chaotic world. There's a running theme of memory, not just in terms of recalling the past, but in how the characters' memories shape their actions. Certain key characters are defined by their past experiences, and the film uses flashbacks and symbolic visuals to show how those memories both haunt and drive them. The scars they carry aren't just physical. They're emotional, and the film makes a point of showing how these scars shape who they are in the present. There's a deep metaphor here about how the past doesn't just inform us, it defines us. The characters' attempts to hold onto their memories are a form of resistance, a refusal to let the world completely erase their history. Lastly, the symbol of the broken, you'll see it again and again in the visual design, especially with certain key locations. Abandoned buildings, cracked mirrors, shattered glass. These broken elements are metaphors for the characters themselves, pieces of something once whole, now scattered and fractured. The world has broken them, and in turn, they are breaking the world in their attempt to survive. But there's beauty in these broken moments. The cracks in the mirror still reflect something, albeit imperfectly. The shattered buildings still stand, even though they're crumbling. This brokenness, rather than being just an image of destruction, is also one of survival and resilience. It's a reminder that even in the most fractured pieces, there's still the potential for something to rise from the ruins. The repeating images of animals, specifically birds and wolves, also tie into this idea of both freedom and survival. Birds are often associated with freedom, with flight, with escaping the confines of the world. Yet, in the context of this film, the birds seem trapped, flapping against a broken sky, unable to escape. The wolves, on the other hand, are wild, primal creatures that survive by instinct, hunting, and living in packs. They're a symbol of the raw, untamed nature of survival, and yet there's a beauty in that wildness. The wolves, in particular, are symbolic of the characters' own struggles with their animal instincts, the need to protect, to hunt, to survive, but also to maintain a shred of humanity in the process. 28 Years Later isn't just a post-apocalyptic thriller. It's a layered, complex story where symbolism isn't just there for decoration. It's actively working to deepen the film's exploration of survival, identity, and the cycle of human history. Every visual choice, every recurring motif, serves to build the world and the themes, giving the audience something to chew on long after the credits roll. It's a film that invites you to look beyond the surface, to see the hidden meanings in every shadow, every burst of light, and every broken piece of the world. And once you start noticing these symbols, the whole film opens up in ways that are nothing short of mesmerizing. If you've been following the 28 Years Later series, then you'll know that the film doesn't just feel like a continuation. It feels like a natural evolution of the franchise. The way this film contributes to the overarching narrative is subtle but impactful. It doesn't rely on past films' beats or retread old ground. Instead, it builds upon the foundation laid by its predecessors and explores the next phase of this broken world, one that's even further decayed, even more complex. By the time you're dropped into this grim, post-apocalyptic landscape, it's clear that 28 years later isn't just about surviving the initial outbreak anymore. Now, it's about living with the consequences of that survival. The characters who've lived through the worst are facing something deeper, a world that's not just broken, but irreparably fractured. The film expands the universe, making the horrors of the previous films seem like the tip of the iceberg, as if we're only now starting to understand the true scope of the damage. It's not merely about surviving an outbreak anymore. It's about how humanity grapples with its very existence in the ruins. What's particularly fascinating here is how the filmmakers handle the growing sense of time. Previous installments were concerned with the initial chaos, the immediate fallout of an apocalypse. Now, the passage of time becomes as much a character in the story as any of the survivors. The film doesn't give you an easy escape from the weight of the years that have passed. This isn't a shiny reboot. nor is it a film that simply restarts the story from a similar angle. The sense of history feels more real, more earned. The survivors aren't just dealing with fresh trauma, they're living with the emotional, psychological scars of decades. And that shift in tone, from raw survival to living with the aftermath, adds an emotional depth to the story that wouldn't have been possible if this were just another chase and survive installment. Now, let's talk about historical context. If we consider this film in a broader sense, there are some interesting undercurrents that draw on real-world historical events. The film does an exceptional job of grounding its fictional world in an eerie sense of realism. Sure, the idea of a viral apocalypse is completely fictional, but the ways in which the world reacts to catastrophe, the social breakdown, the collapse of political and economic systems, the way communities either band together or fall apart, feel grounded in our understanding of how society reacts in the face of real-world disasters. The filmmakers pull inspiration from various historical moments of societal collapse and upheaval, from the fall of empires to the breakdown of order in war-torn regions, to create an unsettlingly familiar atmosphere. One standout aspect is how the film portrays the psychological and societal effects of prolonged disaster. It's not just about how people survive the event itself, but how the trauma of living through something like this changes people. It's subtle, but there's a sense that the survivors are shaped by their world, molded by the years of hardship and loss. This theme isn't just about the apocalypse in a conventional sense. It's about the human condition when faced with an environment that refuses to heal. The psychological scars here are as important as the physical ones. This focus on trauma, grief, and resilience is something the franchise has slowly evolved toward, and it reaches new heights in this installment. Visually, the film leans into a gritty realism that heightens the sense of immersion. The set designs, the costumes, the weathered, decaying landscapes all evoke the feel of a world that's been living on the edge for years. And it's not just the decay of buildings. The film also captures the human cost of time. You can tell that the filmmakers did their homework, not just in designing the look of the world, but in understanding the cultural shifts that would take place in such a setting. Whether it's the ways in which technology has become obsolete, the way social structures have dissolved, or how the very idea of civilization has evolved, it feels believable. It doesn't just look like a post-apocalyptic world. It feels like a real world that's lived through decades of deterioration. Another fascinating element of this film is how it handles the sense of continuity with the earlier films in the series. Thematically, there's a real push to explore how the events from the earlier films have resonated through time. The emotional and political consequences of earlier decisions echo throughout the film, creating a sense that each previous film has not only contributed to the plot, but to the evolving human experience in this fictional world. The franchise has always been good at exploring the ripple effects of global events. But here, you can truly feel how history has shaped the characters. It's as if the franchise is saying, this isn't just about what happens during an apocalypse, it's about what happens after. In terms of historical accuracy, it's more about emotional truth than it is about precise details of past disasters. There's a clear effort to reflect the way societies have responded to and recovered from real-world crises, whether it's pandemics, political upheaval, or environmental collapse. The way communities attempt to rebuild, the rise of authoritarianism in some areas, and the loss of trust in institutions all feel eerily familiar. The film might not be based on a particular historical event, but it's rooted in the real-life consequences of humanity's failure to protect itself. It uses historical lessons as a framework to explore the psychological impact of long-term survival in a world that refuses to heal. And that historical context isn't just window dressing, it's woven deeply into the narrative, enhancing the stakes and the emotional journey. So, in a way, 28 years later feels like an incredibly timely film, even though it's set in a world far removed from our own. By drawing on the overarching history of the series and blending in subtle historical references, the film elevates its storytelling, adding a layer of realism that makes the whole experience feel more grounded and immersive. It's not just about the apocalypse, it's about what happens to us once we've lived through it, and how the echoes of history shape our world long after the dust has settled. When you think about the production quality of 28 years later, the first thing that hits you is how incredibly tight the budget must have been to pull off such a visually immersive and emotionally complex story. There's a sense that every dollar was stretched, carefully spent on crafting a world that feels gritty and lived in. The practical effects, set designs, and even the level of detail in the world building all seem to scream that a great deal of thought was given to ensuring that the production quality never felt cheap. Whether it's the decaying remnants of civilization or the tension-filled moments between the characters, the movie doesn't cut corners. For a film that's not relying on massive explosions or an army of CGI creatures, the quality feels substantial in every frame. So, when you look at the budget, it's impressive that the filmmakers were able to deliver a cinematic experience that stands tall against bigger budget projects. The budget was modest by today's standards for a post-apocalyptic genre film, yet the movie punches way above its weight in terms of atmosphere and engagement. But let's talk about how the box office numbers match up. Coming in, the film had big expectations, riding on the coattails of its predecessors and the loyal fan base that followed the series. Fans were hungry for more, and the marketing department knew they had a golden opportunity to tap into that energy. Early trailers teased a darker, more introspective side to the franchise, drawing in both longtime followers and newcomers who might be intrigued by the fresh direction. Word of mouth was a huge factor, too. As the film released, the buzz around its emotional depth and unique take on the post-apocalyptic narrative began to spread like wildfire. The film didn't rely solely on big marketing stunts, but on the power of its story and emotional resonance. The marketing strategy itself, focusing on the human element rather than just the survival aspects, was key in creating intrigue. It wasn't about just another zombie or outbreak movie. It was about what happens after the world falls apart. The focus on the personal struggles of the survivors and how they've been living with the consequences of those 28 years made it clear that this wasn't just a typical disaster film. This approach helped set it apart in a crowded field. Despite all of this, the film's reception wasn't as widespread as it could have been. Yes, the die-hard fans were there, showing up in droves for opening weekend, but the mainstream box office didn't see the kind of massive, blockbuster returns that it might have hoped for. And while the film did well internationally, especially in regions that have embraced the franchise from the beginning, it didn't quite hit the heights that earlier entries did. The reason? It's a complex film, and not everyone was prepared for the deep, philosophical themes or the slower pace that's a marked departure from the adrenaline rush of earlier entries. In a world of fast-paced, high-stakes blockbuster films, 28 years later didn't quite offer the instant gratification that many expected from the franchise, so its earnings were solid, but not as explosive as expected. However, it's important to note that the film's longevity might be more impressive than its opening week numbers. Over time, it found its audience, and it earned a healthy reputation as one of the more intellectually engaging entries in the post-apocalyptic genre. People who initially passed on it because it didn't deliver what they were expecting, or didn't fit the formula they were hoping for, returned later to find that the film's subtle and layered storytelling offered something worth revisiting. By word of mouth, it built up momentum, leading to steady box office returns over time, and the film found a second wind on home video and streaming platforms. When you break down the numbers, the film ultimately landed in a solid place in terms of profitability, even if it wasn't a runaway smash. It didn't go on to break box office records, but considering the modest budget, it was still a win. The fact that the film didn't flop despite its unconventional pacing and narrative structure speaks to its deep resonance with audiences who crave something more thoughtful and emotionally heavy, rather than just a conventional action thriller. The long-term success of the film is more in the way it has carved out a niche for itself, becoming a cult favorite among those who appreciate its complex take on post-apocalyptic life, its philosophical undertones, and its refreshingly slow burn. So, while the box office may not have been a blockbuster, it's safe to say that 28 years later found its place in the film world, especially when it comes to earning the respect of critics and building a lasting fan base. It's a film that proves you don't need explosive earnings to be seen as a significant success in its genre. Sometimes, it's the smaller films with more heart that find the audience they deserve over time. So, you're ready to dive into 28 years later, but where can you actually experience this gripping, thought-provoking thriller? The movie has made its way to various platforms, and depending on your mood or how you prefer to watch films, you've got a few different ways to enjoy it. Let's break it down so you can get the full experience. First off, if you're someone who loves the theater experience, that big screen, the sound system, and that communal feeling of watching a film with others, 28 Years Later did have a limited theatrical release. The experience of sitting in a dark theater, watching this world unfold on a massive screen, is one that can really intensify the atmosphere of the film. The film's slow burn tension and emotional beats hit differently when the darkness surrounds you and you're fully immersed in the sound design. If you happen to catch it in a theater showing a special screening, that's probably the best way to get the full cinematic punch that the filmmakers intended. It's a movie that benefits from the scope and scale of the theater, and if you're lucky enough to find it screening in an indie cinema or as part of a retro release, don't miss that chance. Now, if you missed it in theaters or prefer to watch it in the comfort of your own home, the movie is available on streaming platforms. This is where you can truly settle in and let the film draw you into its world at your own pace. The pacing may not be for everyone, but watching it on your couch with the ability to rewind or pause whenever you need might just give you that extra bit of room to appreciate the subtlety of the storytelling. Streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Hulu, depending on your region, have picked it up, making it relatively easy to watch whenever the mood strikes. With a streaming option, you can enjoy the world of 28 Years Later in the privacy of your own space. Grab that second bowl of popcorn and settle into the